This unit focuses on the topic of selection. We'll look at 5 different types of selection: class selection, temporary initial selection, time selection, adverse selection, and spurious selection. We'll cover the definition of each type of selection and give examples of each of them. In this unit, we'll consider how selection relates to both mortality and morbidity, where mortality means that we're considering the rate of death, and morbidity is the technical term for the rate at which lives in a population get sick. Mortality rates vary both within a population and between different populations as a result of a number of different influences, usually known as risk factors. So, for example, we may observe that mortality rates vary between men and women, between different geographical areas, or between those with different occupations. The same factors are likely also to influence morbidity. Selection is the process by which lives are divided into separate groups, so that the mortality or morbidity within each group is homogeneous. That is, the mortality or morbidity of all lives within a particular group can be adequately represented by the same model. This means we might have different mortality tables for men and women, for those in different geographical areas, or for those in different occupations. We need to consider 5 main types of selection: class selection, adverse selection, time selection, temporary initial selection, and spurious selection. Let's look at each of these in turn. Class selection occurs when each group of lives is specified by a particular characteristic which is believed to have a permanent effect on mortality or morbidity. As an example here, we could use sex. We know that men and women have different rates of mortality, and subdividing a mixed sex population into 2 groups, one male and one female, is an example of class selection. We see concrete examples of this in the life tables we use. English Life Tables number 15 has one set of mortality rates applying to men and one set applying to women. We could also use occupation as an example of class selection, as people with different jobs may experience different mortality, for instance, between those in manual employment and those in non-manual employment. These 2 factors, sex and occupation, may also affect morbidity. Rates of sickness are usually observed to be different between men and women, and can also be influenced by an individual's occupation. Temporary initial selection occurs when each group of lives is defined by a specified event happening to all members of the group at a particular age. The difference in mortality or morbidity between a group of lives that do experience the specified event and a group of lives that do not will endure for a certain number of years after the specified event, known as the select period. Once the select period has expired, there would be no observable difference in mortality or morbidity between these 2 groups, so the effect of the initial selection process is temporary, hence the name. A good example of this is the underwriting process applied to lives taking out life assurance policies. Those having had a medical assessment when taking out a policy will experience lower death rates and lower sickness rates than the population as a whole for the next few years. We're familiar with this form of select mortality from the AM92 mortality table. We use square brackets to denote the age at which the life experienced the specified event, in this case a medical assessment. Time selection relates to the effect that mortality and morbidity vary with calendar time. This effect is usually observed at all ages. For example, over time, mortality has improved due to medical advances in the treatments offered for illnesses, and also due to improved living standards. Where a separate mortality table is produced for different calendar periods, such as PMA 92 tables and PMA 00 tables, which are based on data from 1992 and the year 2000 respectively, The difference between the tables is an example of time selection. Also, in recent years, we have witnessed a worsening of morbidity due to changes in diet. The widespread availability of high-fat convenience foods has led to increasing levels of obesity, which has a direct impact on sickness rates. Adverse selection occurs when the effectiveness of the controlled selection process, such as underwriting, is reduced. Any of the previous forms of selection may also exhibit adverse selection. Our first example here is where people lapse or withdraw from their life assurance policy. Seriously ill people are unlikely to withdraw from their life assurance policy just at the point when it's most likely to pay out. So those people choosing to lapse their life insurance are likely to be in better health and so have lighter mortality than those who do not. This withdrawal of healthy lives will mean that the insurance company will face worse mortality experience from those that remain. In this way, the withdrawal of healthy lives will have an adverse effect on the insurance company. Our second example relates to smokers taking out policies with life insurance companies that do not use an individual's smoker status to decide what premiums to charge. The effect of smoking on mortality is well documented. If an insurance company takes it into account, it would charge higher premiums to those who smoked, since they have shorter life expectancies, meaning they will pay premiums for a shorter time, and the sum assured under the policy is likely to be paid sooner. So smokers would naturally choose insurance companies that did not use smoker status to set premiums, as their premiums will be competitively low for smokers. The outcome will be that a company that does not use smoker status will suffer from adverse selection, as the ratio of smoker to non-smoker lives that it takes on will increase, and the effectiveness of the company's underwriting process will be reduced. The final form of selection to consider is spurious selection. This occurs when differences in mortality or morbidity appear to arise from factors that are not the true cause of the difference. When groups are formed, we usually infer that the factors used to define each group are the causes for the differences in mortality observed between the groups. However, there may be other differences in composition between the groups, and it's these differences, rather than the differences in the factors used to form the groups, that are the true causes of the observed mortality differences. Ascribing mortality differences to groups formed by factors that are not the true causes of these differences is termed spurious selection. For example, regional differences in mortality may be due to different occupational mixes between the regions, rather than being caused by the specific geographical location. If we attributed the mortality differences to the geographical location, instead of the true cause, occupation, this would be an example of spurious selection. A second example focuses on the effect of increasing the strictness of the underwriting process. If an insurance company applies a stricter underwriting process to lives taking out policies, this will lead to a lighter mortality experience for the company. The composition of the population of policyholders has changed with time due to the change in the underwriting strictness, but it may instead be thought that the underlying mortality has improved over time. This incorrect interpretation is an example of spurious selection. That concludes our look at the different types of selection. In summary for this topic, you need to know the definitions and descriptions of each of the different types of selection, and you also need to know examples to illustrate each of the different types.